Welcome, everyone, to, what did we call this? Insider Do's and Don'ts for Seamless ERP Success. So we'll do a couple quick introductions. My name is Andy Zinkle. I am the Director of ERP Solutions at goVirtualOffice. We are a value-added reseller for a couple of different ERP platforms out of the Madison area. I've been at goVirtualOffice for going on 9 years, doing implementation work that entire time. Prior to my life at GVO, I was a general manager at a light manufacturing company. I always say as a general manager, I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. I have a feel for operations, I have a feel for finance, I have a feel for HR, marketing, whatever. Never developed a master or an expertise in any one of them, but hopefully gave me enough experience and such that I can, talk confidently with prospects that have a need, and hopefully I can understand their business. Jamie?
Hi everybody, my name is Jamie Zdroik. I'm COO at goVirtualOffice. My life prior to this was 15 years of manufacturing and distribution. So one of the manufacturers was up here, Germantown. One was down in Montgomery, Alabama. And then a large distribution center out in Oconomowoc. And so I've been with goVirtualOffice for the same time as Andy. We were started on the exact same day. Andy was a teacher's pet though, so I wasn't usually the favorite. But I started off, I did 5 years implementation, hands to keyboard work for a wide variety of clients. About 3 years worth of the sales, kind of talking to leaders like you, figuring out where are you at, where do you want to go, and trying to figure out what's reasonable in between. And then the last year has been more strategy. So our presentation today, we're just going to try to present for you, just as you're going through and evaluating software, what are some of the gotchas? So Andy and I have been living this world for a long time. A lot of you, if you go through an ERP transition, implementation, it might not happen that often in your career. So Andy and I very much look at things from the end client standpoint and what are some of the gotchas. Just trying to inform you, make sure that as you're going through this, you're asking the right questions so that way you don't go down a trail that you shouldn't. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about team, scope, budget, data and implementation, common pitfalls, and best practices. And Andy and I are super informal, so if anybody has any pertinent questions that you want to just, quick ask, feel free to do so. Otherwise, we'll be around afterwards if anything is not that urgent. All right, so keys of a successful implementation. First of all, trusting the person that you're working with. It's one of those things where, again, our offices are in Madison. I live actually just on the street. It took me about 5 minutes to get here. But at any rate, make sure you trust who you're working with. Try to get some references from them. Make sure you're on the same page. Project team. So we're talking about your own internal team. So it's good to have people that are from particular areas of your company. Usually it's somebody in HR, somebody in manufacturing, across the board. You guys know your businesses better than you do, but making sure that you have that group that you know is going to help get this over the hump for you. Scope. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Scope creep is real. It happens all the time, even internally. And it's one of those things where around an ERP implementation, people are like, yes, this is going to be awesome. It's going to be this huge event, and all these pet projects that I've had on my desk for years and years, we're going to do it all at once. Make sure that you temper that, because there comes a point where if you try to do too much too fast, the change management side on your team is just going to kill you. Communicate. Keep tasks moving forward. So this one is communication internally at your own individual organizations, but then also externally. So people like Andy and I, or other third-party applications that you may have in your project, open lines of communication is going to be key. And we'll get more into this as we go through. And the last one is data. So the reason that people go through ERP implementation, they want to have data to make quality decisions. So as you're going through it, what Andy and I usually advise clients is think about the KPIs that matter to you and then back into the processes to make sure that those reports are populated. So for example, if you have, maybe there's a very particular cash management search or report that you always want to look at, have that in mind, bring it up with whoever you're working with. Maybe there are some KPIs as it relates to warehouse management that are key, bring those up. Whatever the specific reports, think of those. Also though, I'll caution, don't start making up reports at this phase. That's a huge temptation for people. It's like, oh, I really need this to make a decision. 80-20 rule. Make sure you apply it a lot. Andy, any other color?
No, I think we'll get into each of these here in a little bit more depth. So as Jamie alluded to, it really starts with choosing the right partner. And every partner that is out there, they all are a little bit different. Some are very structured, maybe even scripted in their approach to an implementation. Others very flexible. Ultimately, you have to pick a partner that's going to make sense for you, for your company's culture, what your goals and objectives are. In some cases, you're working with an independent partner, like we are. In other cases, you might be working directly with that software publisher. With the different ERPs that we work with, it works both ways. Pick somebody that is going to help you along your path and come alongside you as a business partner, and be with you for the long haul. I think there's another slide further on, so I'm jumping a little bit, but it shouldn't feel transactional. It should feel like a relationship, a partnership. Whoever you choose should be an extension of your business and be along with you from the beginning as you gather requirements all the way through go live and beyond over the next couple of years. This is a long-term relationship.
Agreed. The only other thing I would add on to is, as you're considering partners, ask them the staff that would be supporting you, what their background is. So like for our company, we try to hire industry experts that can bring their expertise to bear. So for example, Andy and I aren't CPAs, but we have CPAs on staff to help with around the financials. We both have a different background as it relates to like manufacturing. You're not going to have somebody that's specific to your industry at all points in time, but try to find somebody that's hiring people that have 10, 15 years of experience versus just a newbie, you know what I mean, where they don't really know anything other than the software that they've been shown. And so that's where, for me, I've always enjoyed doing this job because I get to see inside of all these other companies and how they're run. So you get to see all those best practices, and I can also interject my own best practices that I used back in the day when I used to do what you guys are doing.
Oops. So project team. Along with your partner that you're partnering with outside, you want to make sure that you assemble the appropriate project team internally as well. And it starts with it. We've got two slides on this topic. The first is really about that project owner. At least that's the term that we use. You need to have somebody within your organization that is really going to own the implementation on your side. They're going to have authority to make decisions on behalf of the company as it pertains to the implementation and the software that you're implementing. Be able to be organized and keep the project on track, manage the scope and the budget of the project, be available to communicate with the outside partner, and really just take the whole project by the horns and really own it.
Yeah, and just some other color on this. Usually what we find is it's usually best to have a pair as it relates to this. So you have one person that's living this day to day, kind of your technical SME, but then you have some executive that has the ability to say, this is how it's going to be. Because what's going to happen is that person that's running it day to day is eventually going to come to a point where they're a peer. So maybe there's a process thing that they need to have decided between billing and out in operations, and they need to have a resolution. You need to have that one executive that says, I'm hearing you both, this is our decision, and this is how we're going to move forward with that. And that's usually sometimes where that project management person doesn't quite have that level to just move past that.
And it's really going to depend on the size of your organization as well.
Sure.
If you're a smaller company, that executive may have to be really, really heavily involved. If you're a larger organization, you're probably going to have somebody more on the front lines that's going to manage that day-to-day operations of the project, but then report back up to or seek advice from the executive sponsor. But along with that, it's not just the project owner that's involved. Typically, what my recommendation is you have a project owner, and then underneath that you have subject matter experts. Those are the people that really understand the ins and outs of the individual process areas. You've got somebody that's a SME for finance, another one that's maybe your production manager is your SME for for your manufacturing operations, maybe somebody in the warehouse that understands your supply chain, somebody in shipping that understands that part of the process, and so on. So you want one or two subject matter experts for each process area. And then on top of that, you might have IT involved, and they might serve as your system administrator after the implementation. They might be involved in helping to pull the data that needs to get converted and so on. And then you've got those executive sponsors kind of overarching all of it.
Yeah, I think Andy makes a good call out with size of organization, because if you're a smaller company, the COO or somebody like that might be the one that's owning the project beginning to end. But that's where this second line up here is very key, that end user. Usually what you'll see is like around billing, where that individual biller knows that there's some weird thing that happens on the second of every other month that's leader doesn't do at all. So they don't have visibility to it. And that's what you're going to find as you go through your requirements, those little gotchas. And that's just where, again, the 80-20 rule. The system will do a lot. The ERP system that you choose will likely be able to do a lot of things automatically. But there comes a point where you don't necessarily have to have it in the software if it happens twice a year. There comes a point where it's like, well, if we can automate the rest of that, maybe that's the one day where it might just be a little bit of a pain in the butt and you're just going to figure out a manual workaround. And again, if you have a good partner, they'll inform you of that. They'll say, okay, we can do that and it's going to be X, a couple $1,000s. Do you still want to move forward with it or not? A good partner should do that for you, and they shouldn't just say, yep, we'll do that, and just send you the bill.
I want to touch a little bit more on subject matter experts too. The title of this slide is Test, Test, Test. And the subject matter expert plays such a critical role in the implementation, and they really need to get pulled in from the beginning to help you define those requirements rather than a C-level executive saying how it needs to work. I mean, they should have the vision. The C-level should absolutely have the vision, but they have to enlist the expertise of those end users. But then as the project goes on, now you need those subject matter experts to go in and test the software before you go live. Make sure that it's working the way those end users need to have it run. That way when you do go live, it's a lot more seamless. I'm not going to say it's flawless because no implementation is 100% flawless. You're going to have hiccups, especially around the go live. Change management is real, right? But the more testing you can do throughout the project, the better off you're going to be, especially if you have the right people doing the testing.
Okay, so again, both of these next two slides are kind of related, but at the end of the day, know what you want your software to do. So at the end of the day, this is the process that we need to enable. And it's better to start with that before you start trying to select your softwares. Because at the end of the day, there are plenty of people that are out there that are more than happy to make a buck on a software subscription. But if you set that in advance and say, this is what I'm looking for, versus somebody just selling you features and sets that you may never have value of.
Yeah, and I think when you have what conversations plays into it as well. Certainly you want to have these conversations on what you need with your partner or your software provider, whoever you're working with. But I would suggest prior to actually even meeting with your software provider or going through the selection, you need to have those conversations internally on what you really need the software to do. So many times we get into an implementation and we get into requirements and there ends up being these sidebar conversations that we're not even a part of, which in some cases is good because we are consultants. We're supposed to be asking questions that get you thinking, but in a lot of cases, those conversations haven't happened at all. And our starting the conversation is really just the catalyst for them to start their own conversations. And then the project gets delayed because they need to take the time to go figure out what they really need. So start that conversation early, even before you start having those conversations with the software providers.
Yeah. So again, like I said, these slides are related. So first word of caution is one software will likely not solve all of your problems. If anybody tells you that they have the silver bullet, they're likely lying. You can nod politely and say thank you. But at the end of the day, with what you guys are doing with manufacturing, there are going to be components that are going to come together. And so it's a good partner should give you that best of breed, and it shouldn't just be the answer like, this is what works for me. When I say me, who's ever selling you, they should be saying, this is the combination that's best of breed. So for a use case for us, if we are dealing with people that are doing e-commerce and distribution, there's usually platforms that were like, these are tried and true, they work every time, just go with them. So for example, I have a Shopify website where I'm accepting customer orders that then goes through a middleware that we use called Celigo. And actually now NetSuite has a package where you can directly integrate, but Shopify passes the order via the middleware to NetSuite. NetSuite, you kind of handle all your back office stuff, but then the people out on the floor use RF Smart for WMS. And a good partner will tell you that, whereas sometimes they'll just say, well, my product also does that. But is it best of breed? Is it going to be the best use case or best experience for your end users? Just ask questions.
Yeah, Jamie, you bring up a good point with the silver bullet concept. There is no software that's going to solve all of your challenges. So if you are entering into your selection process, find that ERP that can serve as your core that does 80% of what you need, and then plug in the 20%. You want that ERP to be something that is kind of your hub, your source of truth, and easily connected to those softwares. So as you go into your selection, think of it as an entire tech stack, I guess, for lack of a better term, of what all you need. But you want to make sure that things are talking to each other effectively. If you're moving to a new ERP, either you're on one that is maybe older, antiquated and such, or maybe you're graduating from a QuickBooks and a bunch of Excel spreadsheets and you need to get it all tied together, right? But make sure that everything will connect together well, and again, find that 80% that can serve as your hub.
Okay, this is mine. I put up here because this is my pet peeve. So at the end of the day, definition of what your needs are matter. And the reason I say this is NetSuite has a product that they call advanced manufacturing, that everyone hears that word and like, yes, I need advanced manufacturing. It sounds good, doesn't it? But then at the end of the day, it's like, well, what does that mean to you? So in NetSuite's term, when they say advanced manufacturing, they're talking about very robustness around like supply chain management, like triggering POs and what have you, which can all be accomplished. However, when some people think, hey, I need advanced manufacturing, they think of something like this. So this was a customization that we've done for a number of clients where this is what their team experiences out on the factory floor. So their team is interacting with this and it has all the steps outlined, like this is what you do at this step. Register my time, send feedback to QA, print off my labels, grab this serial numbered item. So the team is just interacting with this. They're not interacting with the natural firm. But when you guys think advanced manufacturing, you're probably thinking something this, where it's a little bit more visual, all in capturing, but the definition is different. So again, specifics matter.
Yeah. So scope of work, they're not all equal. As you are working with your software provider, your partner, whoever you're choosing to work with, there's the software, and then there's the implementation. They're two different things. Obviously, there's a relationship, but as you get into beyond the software selection and into the implementation conversations, think about what that project needs to look like. What are the components of it, and how significant is each step in that implementation process for you? What does it need to look like for you? How much time is incorporated into requirements gathering? How much is put into walkthroughs and training and testing? How much is for go-live support? How much for data, often overlooked? Think about all of those components and make sure that it's scoped correctly for you. There's partners out there and software provider or software publishers out there that they kind of have cookie cutter statements of work. Sometimes it works for everybody, sometimes it doesn't. So look at what you need and make sure that statement of work fits what you need for your business.
Agreed. So these are if I had to say, in the past when prospects have shared their proposals with me, I'm like, just send it over to me before you sign. I'm happy to look at it. I'll let you know, hey, this looks good, this doesn't look good. These 3 bullet points are where people will fudge your numbers really quick. And if you are looking at a proposal for an implementation, depending on the size of your company, say it's a $50 million sort of manufacturer, these lines should represent probably about 60% of your total costs. Data is huge, and it's one of those things where You're going to have some, it's like when you do physical inventory at the end of each month, you know, that pallet that's back in the warehouse that nobody wants to address, that's just been buried. That's what it's like when you're going through an implementation, looking at your data. It's just like, now's the time to clean it up. Walkthroughs and training, you're going to want to make sure that you have walkthroughs for leadership, your super user group, management, and then potentially end users, again, depending on how big you are, and then go live support. So like Andy said, you're going to be, what we always say is you have a muscle memory. So when people we're using a software program for years, you kind of get used to, okay, this is how I interact with this. You're going to move to a new program, and that muscle memory is going to be just a little bit different. And so that first month of an implementation is going to be very stressful for the team because it's a little bit different. And so that's the point where having people on site, we are strong advocates of it for that first week, having that team there. Usually, depending on the size, we'll have about 3 people. And so you'll have one person that's out on the floor with those individuals. You'll have one person that's in the back office helping with CSRs and what have you. And then you'll have one other individual that's there for like leadership and for finance to make sure all the numbers are coming together. It's a very important time because, again, it will be stressful. There's no way of saying it.
Yeah, the other piece of the statement of work is don't boil the ocean. So at GVO, we're big advocates for the crawl, walk, run philosophy. A couple of things here. Number one, when you sign up and purchase a new piece of software, you really should shoot for getting it implemented in 6 months. If it goes beyond 6 months, a couple of things happen. Number one, the failure rate of an implementation skyrockets. There's statistics out there that ERP implementations fail at a rate of about 70-75%. Now, what defines failure? That's probably subjective, but it is a high failure rate at 6 months or more. The other thing with 6 months is you should be starting to recoup some of that ROI on the investment after 6 months. If it's taking you a year, 2 years, 3 years to implement, you're going to lose the buy-in of the people in your organization, and from a financial perspective, you're just not getting that investment back, or that return on that investment back.
Yeah, and so just use case around the crawl, walk, run. Focus on day one is more or less, can we take orders, can we ship orders, and can we collect money? If you're doing that, you're successful, because if you're not doing that, well, then your business is going to fail, and your customers are going to be mad, and they're going to move on. Then, after that, it's like all those nice to have, like, hey, we get to it later, but all the nice widgets that are going to help with efficiencies, that should kind of be a secondary goal. It's can I keep revenue flowing? That's your focus.
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. I always say an ERP is a living, breathing thing. You want to get it up and running, but once you're done, it's not done. So you want to get it in, get people operating, get people used to the system, and then figure out what are those bells and whistles that you really need. Jamie would attest to this too. We hear all the time in requirements, well, we have to have this, or we have to have this report, or we have to have this functionality. And then they get in and they get live and they start using the software like, oh, I guess I didn't really need that. The software already has it in another way. So why did we spend all that money to customize it a certain way? Start at a foundational level, use the software the way it was designed to work, with some tweaks. There's some bending and twisting that needs to be done. You want to put in a few bells and whistles at the beginning to get some buy-in, get people to say that, to see the value in the change that you're forcing upon them in some cases. But don't do it all out of the gate. Do it over the course of a year, 2 years, but hit those key things. Can you ship orders? Can you receive payments from your customers? I'm sure your vendors probably want to get paid as well. Can you do those core functions and then build on the automation from there? Yeah, this goes along with that. Jamie mentioned walkthroughs and training as kind of one of those 3 key areas. And that's the area where we are most likely to see scope creep. You go through requirements, you build it out, and then you show people what it's going to do, and they're like, oh, we can do that. Well, can it also do this other thing too? And can it do this thing over here? Yeah, it can. But do you want to delay using the software for that? Or do you want to start using it and then go from there? So timeline. I mentioned 6 months. That's kind of our benchmark. Typically, our projects are from the time you purchase software, we're typically at around 4 months, I would say, is pretty typical for us. Mostly because we embody that crawl, walk, run philosophy. We're getting them live foundationally in 4 months. But in order to hit that 4 to 6 month type time frame, there's deadlines. There's things that have to happen. Everybody has to do their part. Your partner has to do the configuration, any development, et cetera, that needs to be done. But on your side, there's deadlines for producing data and providing that to your partner, for being available for meetings, for doing testing. All of those different components are really critical, and everybody has to do their part. We typically will set out a project plan at the beginning, and we have some milestone dates, and we're reviewing them weekly to make sure everything is on track, and raising red flags when they're not going to be. But you don't want to be that one person that is delaying everything, because if one deadline gets met, it's a snowball effect, maybe a domino effect. Domino effect would be more appropriate, but it'll affect every other date down the line. And ultimately your go live date. And that go live date is what really should be locked in stone. You want to try and shoot for that.
Yeah, I agree with Andy. It's one of those things where as you get closer to the go live date, the flexibility on those previous homework dates becomes a little more cemented in. Yeah. So as he was talking, I was just remembering an implementation where as you get closer to that go live date, the dates of data transition are critical. And I still remember there was one client where he missed it. And it was one of those things where we were supposed to show up on Monday. And I'm like, Mark, you're getting close. If you don't have this to me by Friday at this time, you're going to watch me in your conference room doing your data rework, and you're not going to like it. Blew through it, gets it to me on Sunday morning when I'm traveling. I show up on Monday, true to form. I'm sitting in the conference room doing the data, and he's looking at me through the window, and I'm just like, sorry, you have to have this in here for the rest of this to work. So people say deadlines, and there's a reason for it. We're just trying to make sure that you are successful and it looks good for your team. So you have to be respectful of that.
Yeah. And I would say, back to that project owner concept that we talked about earlier, having that person hold people inside your organization accountable as well is a key piece of it. They have to have the guts behind it and the backing of the executive sponsor to enforce that and hold those people accountable. So there's accountability all around. You have to hold your partner accountable as well. That's happened to us as well. We're not perfect either, but you have to have that accountability all the way through the project.
Yeah, so this one is just a little moniker that we always have. When you are going through an implementation, you usually get three levers that you get to pull: quality, time, or budget. It's perfect if you can do all three, but we've also had clients in the past where, you know what, I need to have this done. I'm working on this right now. Client wants to be up by January 6th. They haven't purchased yet, but that's their goal. It's like, okay, great. That means your budget has to be flexible. So if I need to find additional resources and pull them away from different projects, well, you have to pay me more. Same sort of thing. Okay, you want the quality to be high, well, your time might take a little bit longer. So again, if you get all three, good by you. But just be malleable that if you have to do a trade-off, that's usually what has to get traded.
Yeah, usually one of those three is missed in the process. Don't fall for FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Jamie can probably speak to this better than I can because he's been in the sales process more so than I have. But we have seen where software publishers or other partners will enlist that fear. Well, if you don't buy such and such date, you're going to miss out. Or if you don't buy this functionality, you're going to miss out. Do your homework. Make sure you understand what you really need and when you need it, and adapt from there.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if you're, again, as Andy started at the very beginning, this is a long-term partnership. So if all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I don't want to make my decision for another month, your partner should say like, okay, great, I understand that there may be a little ripple effect and this is what it is. It shouldn't be that hard sale. If you're ever in that point where it's feeling like that, just take a breath, step away, try to understand what that underlying motivation is, because it happens. You see it all the time, especially like different software publishers. Again, they have their quotas that they're trying to hit. They're trying to pull you forward. And so they'll understate things or give you a discount, or they'll mess with the scope of work. And then you as an end user are left holding the bag. I've seen it happen. I just hate it. So I'm just trying to be your guys' advocate.
Jamie, you got to take this slide.
So this is always the one that I like to say, because it's one of those things where, yeah? Well, you get to pay for it then too. So this is one that I always tell clients. At the end of the day, an ERP is a very powerful tool, because when you think about it, it's an investment. We always say it's the one employee that you have that never sick, they're always on time, they don't bring any drama with you, but you have to pay for it. So at the end of the day, what do you want to buy? There's nothing wrong with either of these cars. I haven't owned a Ferrari yet, but that's a goal. I have owned that. But on the flip side, when I'm buying my Outback, I know what I'm getting. I'm not going to go from 0 to 60 in 3 point whatever seconds. It just ain't happening. That's not what I bought. So be realistic with what you're purchasing.
Yeah, I think the one difference, though, with an ERP is you can start with an Outback, and over the course of time, you can have it run more like a Ferrari.
Yeah, you guys have seen Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, right.
Bolt on 18 different things onto a little Honda Civic. It'll go 200 miles an hour.
Data. We've got a couple of slides on data here, but I think the point of this quote here is that data is just critical. As Jamie alluded to, the main reason why you're doing an ERP is part of its efficiency, I suppose, right? And doing your job more effectively and such. But in the end, what you really want out of your ERP is data. You want to be able to make good business decisions based on the data that is being put in and received back out. And so many times it's underemphasized in an implementation.
Just adding on to that, I don't think we touched on it in our slides, but just as a call out to them too, is as you make decisions on what that best of breed is going to be for you, before you do, make sure you dig into what does that API connection look like in between, and how often does it happen. And usually a quick judge, if you guys are ever curious, if you'll go on your software provider, whoever you're evaluating, you kind of go under their deep dive. Typically if they have like an API document that reads like a, like an instruction manual, or it's like 200 pages long, that's usually a good indication that these people know what the heck they're talking about. However, if you go there and it's a very salesy sort of pitch where it's like, I'm clicking on things and I'm not seeing any details in terms of how is this happening, that's not to say that it can't happen, but just start to approach it with a word of caution, because that's where costs can go up really high, because people are like, oh, you just connected. How hard could it be? It takes 15 minutes, right? Please temper that expectation, and depending on what you need to do with it.
So how do you approach data in your implementation? I would say start small. We've got reference to historical data up here. I've seen this a lot where we work with a new prospect and they're starting a new implementation and they say, I need all of my transactions brought in from the last 7 years. Do you really? Take a step back and think about how much of that data do you really need? A lot of times we'll do that. We'll take on that effort and we'll convert that data. It's expensive to pay us to do it, but we'll do it, get it in there, and then 6 months goes by and they haven't touched it. So work with your partner, strategize on what data is really needed. In some cases, there is some value. Maybe you need 6 months worth of data brought in so that you can do your demand planning. That's valid. If you need it just because somebody might need to look something up someday, maybe you don't. Maybe an external data warehouse somewhere is sufficient. If you're losing your legacy system altogether and you won't have access to it, put that data somewhere where you maybe can get to it, but don't bother bringing it into your ERP. And I think that goes to the second point. Keep your data clean. You were probably on a legacy system for the last 20 or 30 years. You've got a bunch of junk in there, stuff that hasn't been cleaned up. That pallet that's sitting back in the back corner of the warehouse, right? That same thing exists in data form. Take this time to clean it up. Garbage in is garbage out. You want to put good stuff into your ERP. This is an absolutely perfect time to clean that up. From a financial perspective, you may want to revamp your chart of accounts. From an item master perspective, get rid of data points that don't mean anything to your business because your business doesn't operate like it did 20 years ago. So take the time to think about what really needs to go into your system and only put those things in.
That's accurate.
And I guess to the last point then, validate. Make sure after the data goes in that you are validating it and everything is there that you really need there. It's a whole lot easier to fix data issues before you start interacting with that data. If you go live and you've been using the system for 2 or 3 weeks and you need to fix something, it's a whole lot more challenging because now you have to fight against the data that's actually there that's being used and needs to be used versus what is wrong and needs to be corrected. So take the time before you start interacting with that data to make sure it's clean and in good order. So implementation strategies, there's a couple different roads you can take. I mentioned we're typically in that 3 to 4, maybe 6 month range for our implementations. So strategy 1 is you're coming off of QuickBooks, you're maybe doing some Excel spreadsheets, and you just need to get into a new system and can grow from there. And you're doing bare minimum. And typically that can be done pretty quick. 2 or 3 months, you're in and out. Strategy 2, a little more robust. Maybe you're a mid-market manufacturer. You've got bills of materials that you need to deal with. You've got some item master, some purchasing stuff that you've got to make sure are set up correctly. You've got to make sure you have certain reports in place so that out on the manufacturing floor they can make decisions on scheduling and so on. And so maybe there's a little bit more. That's probably that 3 to 6 month range. And then strategy 3. The whole enchilada. Like, we're going to boil the ocean. We're going to get everything in there from day one. And that 6 to 9 months plus, that might be generous. I'll be honest, I'm on the tail end of an implementation right now that is going to go live in January. That started in January 3 years ago. And they did the whole enchilada. We basically rebuilt their homegrown software, which is a battle in and of itself. But there was a lot that went into it, and they made decisions, and they backtracked, and they went this way, and then they went this way. Whereas if they had the opportunity to just start small, they would have been live, 2 years ago, and been able to build from there. So some common pitfalls. We mentioned it's a long-term plan. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? You want to look at this as not something that we're doing today and then we're done and we're never going to have to think about it again. An ERP doesn't work that way. Think about it. Where do you need to be in 2 years and build towards that? Don't try and solve 2 years from now today.
Yeah, I think it's accurate. I think the one thing to think about in terms of like in your head time frame. So Andy's talking, you have that 6 months at the beginning, kind of getting up and live, what have you. And then depending on your company, if you start chipping away at all those good to have things, it's not unreasonable to say that, whoever your partner is, you probably won't need them too aggressively after, I'd say about 2.5 years would probably be, after your go live would be reasonable. The exception would be is if you're going out and you're doing more acquisitions. So say you brought somebody else on board, you're going to need to bring them in with their data. They're going to have custom processes. That could be a relationship that could go much longer than that. But a good partner should be an advocate that they should try to be pushing work onto your own team as super users. So like at the very beginning, common things that are going to happen is like, hey, I need to have this report, I need to have this search, I need to do what have you. And that's fine. At the beginning, it's probably easiest just to have your consultant take care of that and just move about your day. But over time, they should be saying, hey, you've made this ask several times. Can we schedule some time and I'll show you how to do this? Again, a good partner will help you with that.
Yeah, I think to keep in mind that your business is not going to be the same in 2 or 3 years that it is today. Mm-hmm. And so make sure you're choosing a software that's going to adapt with you and a partner that's going to adapt with you. If you choose the right partner, they'll get to a point where they'll know your business as well as you do because they're so involved in all of those decisions. You're involving them in your strategy sessions. We have what we call business consulting managers on our managed application services teams. They will go once a year at times to clients and sit down in their boardroom with their team and be a part of their strategy of what's going to happen over the next year or 2 years, and have that technology piece part of that conversation so that they can easily adapt as the business is changing, the software can change with it.
And that's a fair call out. It's one of those things where your partner should be an advocate to hear those conversations, but they don't necessarily have to do that work all the time. So that's why as you're having that relationship, there are things that you can grow into, and that's a fair call out then to your partner and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, but it might not be for your year out. That's always a good note to have, so that way then as you're doing any customization or design, you don't start to paint yourself into a corner then that all of a sudden becomes cost prohibitive in the future.
All right, I think we'll wrap up then with just a couple of best practices. Jamie alluded to the 80-20 rule. We're very much about the 80-20 rule. Build your system for the 80%. What do you do 80% of the time? What's your happy path in your normal orders, or your 5 different types of normal orders, right? If you only do this thing once a year on a Tuesday when it's sunny, don't build your system for that. Right? Build it for the 80% and then automate the 20% where it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then communication. That was one of the 5 keys that we had at the beginning. We didn't have slides specifically for communication, but it really is important. In our implementation methodology, we have an internal checkpoint once a week. Every Monday morning, my team, that's what they do. They have internal status meetings on all of their projects. And then either Monday afternoon or Tuesday is typically then when we have our check-ins with our clients. It's a half hour once a week, but you have that time every week where you are going to be in front of the people that you need to be in front of. And we encourage our clients to have that same type of cadence internally. Have a once a week check-in with the people that are involved in that project, and keep that communication flowing. If you go 3 weeks without really talking about the project's going to stall. You've got to keep that communication flowing.
Yeah, and make sure that that's happening all throughout the implementation until you sign off and say that you're done. Because you can also have it happen once you get into the heat of go live, you're like, I don't have time for that half-hour call. No. Talk to your partner, have that call. They're checking in with you, they're telling you what their work items are, and they're telling you how they're doing with the budget. Because that time right around your go live, you're going to absorb a ton of cost and time, and that can quickly go awry very fast. So again, early on we advocate, get into that cadence so that way you're like, okay, I know that I'm talking to Andy every Monday at 1 o'clock. Early on, it's going to be kind of light and fluffy. You're going to be like, well, this is kind of a waste of my time. But as you get closer, all of a sudden that importance of that, you're going to be happy now that that's built into as a habit.
Yeah, and you bringing up go live is a good point, because the timing of your checkpoints and your status calls with your partner and internally at the beginning of the project and really through most of the project, once a week is probably sufficient. As you get closer to go live, there might be a couple a week. When you get into go live, it's daily. You need to have that checkpoint daily. Everybody go through what are the things that are out there that we need to be working on, and put a red, yellow, green on them. What are the most important things that we need to be focusing on? Let's focus on those first, and let's revisit again tomorrow and see where we're at and start chipping away at them. As you get into week 2, week 3, week 4, maybe they're not daily. Maybe they're 2 or 3 times a week. And then you get back to where you're once a week, and so on. So adapt based on the project level of activity. And then I think this may be our last best practice, but crawl, walk, run. We've kind of harped on it, but start small. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't bite off more than you should chew. And try and grow with the software. Yeah. All right. With that, I guess we'll take questions.
When you get the budget, obviously, your firm would give a budget and internally, what percentage do you normally suggest to people for contingency? And obviously, it's probably based more on, what you've seen in the industry that, they start off with what you said as a scope, and the scope creep usually is 15% more.
The pain in the butt factor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Part of it depends on how big the project is. I don't know that I would put a percent on it across the board because it depends on the project. If you're doing more of that foundational level and doing something in 2 to 3 months, that number may be 10, 15%. If you're doing that whole enchilada, that number's probably a little bit bigger because you're offering up more opportunity for things to go wrong or new ideas or, oh, I never thought to mention that in requirements and so on. There's going to be some of that. I would say if I had to average, and again, most of our projects are in that 3, 4, 5 month time frame, it's probably 10 to 15% for us.
Yeah, and on that note, a good partner though, if you're having those conversations and you're saying yes, make sure you get your change order immediately.
Yeah.
Just so that way everybody's on the same page and has that documented, like, yep, everybody talked about it, we agreed with it, this is the new scope, and if there's any impact to timeline, I'm aware of it. I've seen it happen in the past where consultants also don't like to have confrontations, and neither do internal partners where you have to go back to the boss and say, hey, I need an extra 10 grand for this new ask. People avoid it because it's confrontational, but you know what? It's better to have it at the front. Then all of a sudden you get to go live and everybody's looking at the final number. It's like, what did we do? It happens.
One of our founding partners that retired a couple years ago, she always said the best attribute of a consultant is actually telling a client no. And so we'll do that. We're probably not even as good at that as we probably should be, admittedly. But even internally, as you hear requests come up, we talked about scope creep at that walkthrough phase. As you hear those things, don't be afraid to say no. We're getting close to go live. I hear you. We're going to mark it down, and we do that in our implementations. We keep track of all those future phase initiatives. You have that list. Get through go live, get comfortable, and then let's make decisions on what those priorities are after that.
Yeah, and a good partner will hit that list up about a month later.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things where I hear you, I acknowledge you said it, but let's not talk about that now. I'll double back a month later when you've kind of let the dust settle, and at that point, your mind is going to change in terms of what's a priority. Because you, as Andy said before, you lived in the software now for a little bit, and some of those things that you thought were important are not really a thing anymore.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a decrease in the quality of managed services that we're paying for from some of the big vendors?
I got to be careful not to badmouth our. So we work with NetSuite and Acumatica. Those are the two ERP platforms. Historically, for the last almost 20 years, NetSuite has been kind of our primary, and more recently we've brought on Acumatica as more of an up and coming. Acumatica is strictly through partners, so there is no support or anything directly through the publisher, whereas NetSuite is a little bit different. NetSuite does have software or support available through the publisher. They'll offer support packages themselves. I'll tell you that about 4 years ago, we made a strategic decision to really ramp up our managed application services because we were seeing with NetSuite, our clients were not getting the level of support that they needed. So we structured ours in a way that it's more consultative, I would say, as opposed to reactive. And I think with NetSuite's package, it's a little bit more reactive, and that's their approach. We go in a little bit more proactive. We have regular scheduled meetings, and we're talking strategy and what's the long-term play and so on. So you're going to see some variation in the quality of the managed services, and again, it comes down to what you want and where you're at. Jamie alluded to at about 2.5, 3 years. You're going to kind of graduate off of that managed application a little bit because you're a little bit more stable, and all of those 20% automations that you've been thinking about, you've chipped away at them, and now that list is quite a bit less. So maybe then a more reactive is sufficient. So kind of depends on your needs.
Yeah, and I mean, the biggest thing, you probably heard us use the phrase super user. So that's like somebody on your team. Really strongly advocate for that, because there's some of those baseline questions where people just forgot or they weren't paying attention. Let that person answer that question versus calling us up and charging our hourly rate or whoever the software publisher is. It's just not a good use of your money. I mean, well, fine, we'll do it, but a good partner should be handling kind of that architect level question, like this is how you're going to monetize this decision to do software, and help with the really robust things. It's going to be very interesting to see how AI starts to impact our industry and those low-hanging fruit questions, like those general support things. I think you're going to see a lot of things going more that route. I'd probably say in about 3 years would be my guess. Right now, we're testing it out. We're trying it out. There are some things that it does well. Some things like, still need to do some fact checking.
Yeah.
What level do you take that to? Because you mentioned training, obviously the data in, data out, the reports and things like that. But now all of a sudden I want to change my report. There might be a formula in there that's based upon things. Are you saying that the super user could potentially do that as well, or that would be critical component?
My thing is, if all of a sudden you're working on that report and you're spending more than like 15 minutes to 30 minutes, just ping me. I'll take care of it for you. It's easier. I've just seen that happen before. So like when we were talking about data, I'm just thinking back. I had another guy who did this implementation. Like, I'll do the data myself. This dude was calling me up at 9 o'clock every night for about 3 days. He's just frustrated. He's like, I can't figure it out. I'm like, dude, you could have just paid our team a couple grand to take this off your plate, and you're burning 80 hours a week when you should be running your business. Just let the people that do it all the time handle some stuff like that. That should just usually be if you're in the back of your head, it's like, this is taking longer than it should, I'd reach out.
Yeah, there's requests that are going to come in all the time. So have your super users know how to do the basics,
Yeah.
the little stuff, so that they can handle those small requests that are coming in. And then they have to have the wherewithal to know, this is a little above my pay grade. I probably ought to run this up the chain. And then you go to experts from there.
Yeah, if you're looking at like a case win statement in a report that is about 2 paragraphs long, that should be your point where it's like, yeah, let somebody else do this.
Yeah.
You had a point as far as buy-in from the implementation team. Who's going to do the work? Who's going to do the other work? You had that point in there. I wonder if you could expound on that and maybe talk about where you've seen great examples where they nailed that question, or examples where they didn't nail that question.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we did kind of gloss over that one. The reason we put that in there is it tends to get overlooked on behalf of our clients, where they say, Joe, you're going to now run this implementation, but nobody thinks about Joe's day job. He's got a 40-hour work week full already, so who's going to do Joe's work to begin with? You have to determine what are your priorities. What is your commitment? If this project is a priority, then you've got to figure out ways to maybe divvy up Joe's other work in some ways. The other thing that I have seen work on occasion is there are third-party companies out there that can come in and be your PM for you, so that Joe can still mostly stay on his day job, and this other person can kind of serve as your project owner. It's a little bit tricky because you have to, that company that you bring in, they have to know your business well enough to be able to do that. You have to invest in them and be willing to do that. But they have some expertise in doing that type of activity as well. So you have to decide what's more important. Do I keep Joe doing his day job because he really does it well and I don't want to mess that up? Or is it more important to have Joe doing this so that I make sure my ERP is set up correctly and I'll figure out how to do Joe's work by divvying it up with other people?
Yeah, I mean, a good successful one is if you have somebody in your organization that you're like, you know what, this is a person that we want to groom into a more leadership position, those would be the individual that I would look at, because this project would give them the opportunity to learn more than just their day job and see other aspects of the business, lightly interact with leadership on that level, and then have that opportunity to really understand your business. So again, it's hard to say based on, I don't know your guys' company sizes, but just that's another use case to think of. The other one is if you know, like, oh, we're going to be doing a bunch of acquisitions over the next 2 to 3 years. Well, then that's a person. You pick them out, that's going to be your individual that when that next entity comes on board, they're now responsible for having that same conversation that you're putting all that technical debt on that first one. That's an individual that's going to lead forward with that, and they'll have all that historical memory, so you don't have to repeat that. We've had clients that do that all the time, where they'll incur a lot on that first one, but then I do an acquisition 3 months later. It becomes more of a template. It's kind of rinse and repeat. It's like, okay, this is what we know we need to do. This data, this integration, done in a month. Move on to the next one.
Yeah.
My organization is at a point where we've admitted that our ERP needs updating, but also our CRM needs updating. And it's kind of almost a chicken or the egg mentality. And some strategy that's suggested has been, why don't we offload some of our ERP issues into the investment in a new CRM, kind of take the weight off the issues with the ERP.
So when it comes to ERP and CRM, some ERPs have CRM functionality built in. So think about the level of need you have for CRP. Is it entry level? Is it, can you get by with the ERP's CRP functionality, which is probably not as robust as a CRP specific software? My preference, if you had to choose chicken or an egg, I'm choosing ERP first, because that's your core, right? And then you get your CRP or your CRM plugged into that after the fact. And it's probably a fast follow, right? It's not I'm going to do ERP this year and I'm going to wait for 2 years to do CRM. It's I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do my CRM 3 to 6 months later.
Yeah, if you saw me smiling earlier, this can be very hard to do. So anybody salespeople in the group, or am I in the trust tree? I got 1, 2. Oh, it's too many. Okay, I did sales for a little bit too, so I can badmouth. But salespeople are a pain in the butt when it comes to doing this, because it's always that weird one-off rule. Like, this happens once on the vernal equinox of blah, 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 and it needs to do this. Really, dude? Come on, you don't have 5 minutes at the end of the day to do some admin and add in a custom value? That's the part where you will see that cost blow up. And the other point then too, for better or for worse, pretty reports. People love pretty looking reports. They can also cost a lot of money. And I only just say this because I won't say the software, but there's one software out there where it's totally malleable. And it's just like, you can do whatever you want and then blah, 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 blah. But unfortunately what happens then is all that flows downhill. So then the manufacturing floor now has to now take all of this and actually put it into the structure that you guys need. So if you're going to send it overseas to have manufactured or manufactured on the floor, somebody has to catch that and put it into a usable form for everybody else. And the same sort of thing, all that flows downhill. So eventually it's going to get to the point where it has to be invoiced. And now I made this custom deal 3 steps before, and I had this weird discounting rule that needs to apply. Well, that poor person that's doing the billing then now has to figure that out. And that goes back to that 80-20 rule. Like, okay, I get that you need to be malleable and customer facing and doing all that you can to get the sale, but there also comes a point where it's just like, okay, do I need to have it in the system, or is this just a weird one-off and I don't need to do much more with this? So it can blow up really fast once you have, especially if you have salespeople in doing the design. It's better to just say, okay, what do you need, and we'll provide it for you.
And I would say too, if you decide that you need a robust CRM and your core ERP will not suffice, make sure they communicate.
Yes.
Make sure they communicate. That's where data issues will come into play. You want them to have the same customer data coming across systems, item data coming across both systems. If you start having your sales people put in customer information in one and it's not talking to the other, then when you send the order over to customer service who's got to put that order into the ERP, they can't find the customer. And then you end up with duplicates or triplicates, and now your data is a complete mess and you can't report on anything.
Yeah, and it's just a bad experience then for your client. I mean, the last thing you want is somebody in the back office have to call that client up to clarify things.
Yeah.
It makes you look bad. Your delivery just looks bad.
Okay. I think we're running out of time here, but Jamie and I will be around here for a while this afternoon. Feel free to look us up online. We've got Carl and Jack in the back as well. They've got a booth for goVirtualOffice out in the main hallway as well. So feel free to stop by and chat with any of us.